And let me hit share some here. Uh-oh. Hold on, everybody. Here we go. Okay. All right. Once again, I hope everybody's doing well. Just a few announcements that we need to follow. Today's the 17th of November. Pay attention. Oh, has anybody received your survey that came to you? It should either come via email, or I think it's going to come to you in your email, in your inbox. Has anybody received a survey for the class? It's not coming from me. It comes from the school. I don't know if it came yet. Has anybody seen it?
Yes, they've been coming in.
Okay, cool. All right, so what I want you to do is, I know you guys hate surveys just like I do, but it's really important that you guys fill out those surveys. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my glasses clean. That you fill out those surveys because they're really trying to get a feel for what we are doing as instructors or not doing, as instructors. Your name is not going to be on it. They don't know who said what, so you can say whatever you want to say. But so I just really want to encourage you to please, 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 and please fill out that survey for all of your classes, really. Tell the truth, you know, like they said, tell the truth and shame the devil. All right. This week, we're going to be in the book of Ruth. You have your discussion question. You're going to complete that by, I'm reading without my glasses, Sunday at 11:59. Make sure once again that you are registering for your spring classes. So even if, like I was talking to another student, even if you think you might be leaving or something, it's fine to drop the classes. But we want to get a firm number of who's going to be here or who might be here, next semester, so that we have things allocated in the budget. So we really need you to, and if you have any questions, just drop me an email. If you say, I can't find my advisor or something, I'm part-time, so I'm not an advisor, but I can get you some help and make sure that you get to the right person and get you registered for your classes for spring. Can you believe it? 2021, spring 2021. All right. All right, so we are going to move on. Next week, sorry, y'all. Next week, now my cursor's not moving. We are going to, okay, yeah. Next week, Thanksgiving week, we're going to be in the book of poetry. We're going to be in a few books of poetry. We're going to talk about Psalms, Song of Solomon. We'll be talking about that next week. And I won't hold you too long in case you guys are traveling or anything for Thanksgiving. If you are, y'all better be safe. Okay, be safe. I wanted to go away, but I can't. So I'm going to be here with the people. All right, so the book of Ruth is on our agenda today. We're going to start off today talking about the book of Ruth, but I'm going to start off with, let me hit stop share for a second. I'm going to start off with a video and coming right back to you. I'm going to start off with this video, and I found that for me, visual things help me a little bit more to understand. So I'm coming right back to you, and I'm going to share the audio so that you can hear it. And we won't take in all of this, but let's take in a couple of minutes of the book of Ruth. And I included this link for you so you can watch the whole thing later. So for me, I'm a visual person, and I have trouble understanding things like you could tell me, but if I see it and hear it at the same time, it's a little bit better for me in my learning. So I try to make sure that I get stuff for everybody's learning style. So let's talk a little bit more about Ruth. Here we go.
The Book of Ruth. It's a brilliant work of theological, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are three main characters in the book: Naomi the widow, Ruth the Moabite, and Boaz the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line: "In the days when the judges ruled." And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And of food, they move on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they die too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she, the married widow in Israel, is going to be very hard, and so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi, and she says, "Wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God." And so the two of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth discussing where they're going to find food. And it just so happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out to look for food, and it just so happens that she ends up picking grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who just so happens to be Naomi's relative. We're told that Boaz is a man of noble character, and he notices Ruth. And so after finding out more about her story, he shows remarkable generosity to her. He makes these special provisions so that the immigrant Ruth can gather grain in his field. And in doing so, Boaz is actually obeying an explicit command of the Torah to show generosity to the immigrant and the poor. Boaz is so impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. He prays for her, that God will reward her for her boldness. So Ruth comes home that day, and Naomi finds out that she met Boaz, and she is thrilled. She says Boaz is their family redeemer. Now, this family redeemer thing, this was a cultural practice in Israel where if a man in the family died and he left behind a wife or children or land, it was the family redeemer's responsibility to marry that widow, to take up the land and protect that family. So Naomi, she begins to hope that perhaps there might still be a future for her family. Chapter 3 begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice their situation. So Ruth is going to stop wearing clothes of a grieving widow, and she's going to show signs that she's available to be married. And so Ruth goes to meet Boaz on the farm that night. And as she approaches, Boaz wakes up and he's totally startled. And Ruth makes her intentions very clear. She asks if Boaz will redeem Naomi's family and marry her. Boaz is once again amazed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her family, and he calls Ruth a woman of noble character. It's the same term used to describe of Proverbs 31. So Boaz tells Ruth to wait until the next day, and he will redeem both Ruth and Naomi legally before the town elders. And so the chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi, and they marvel together at all of these recent events.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this and finish up. Let's go back to our page for 1 second. Let me pull down your PowerPoint. So now we have in the book of Ruth, let me pull this up here. In the book of Ruth, we find, now we find women. And not to say that we didn't have women in the previous books that we talked about, excuse me. Let me come back to you. But in this particular book, we find women that have more of a say so. We find women that are more have more dialogue, should I say? Can everybody see my screen? It should say the book of Ruth. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hey, Tim. All right. And so if you have your Bible with you, or if you have it pulled up on your phone, or if you got your app or whatever, you can use your table of contents as well, just in case if you get stuck. But we're going to head down to the book of Ruth. Head down to the book of Ruth. And if you, looking at mine here, Ruth is going to come after the book of Judges. And so last week we talked about, we kind of did a cursory glance of some books that were historical. And Judges, we figure out that a lot of the Israelites, put them in my book. Okay, so the book of Ruth is going to come after the book of Judges. And it's pretty short, so you could go past it. You find that a lot of the historical stories or historical books told just that, history. And so now we have a book that talks solely about women, and you really didn't have a lot about that. So as we go back a little bit, I want you to kind of see something that's on the screen. So let's go back and review. The first 5 books of the Bible, what are they called again? You guys remember?
The Pentateuch.
There you go. The Pentateuch, and that's the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I call it Gelnd, you know, when I was trying to remember things. Okay, first 5 books. Now, it looks like the book of Psalms, which we'll get to next week, which is like poetry, the book of Joshua. Look at these time frames. Were written around 1410 to about 430 BC. We're not quite sure. Let's go over here on the second side. We're not quite sure about when the book of Ruth was written. Not really sure. And guess what? In some instances, we don't really know exactly who wrote this book. Traditionally, they say that Ruth could have wrote the book. So if that is true, here we have a woman who wrote it or was influential in either telling her story about what happened. So it's really interesting. So as I'm reading my Bible here, it is said that it could have been written somewhere around 1000 BC. So this is one of those that we're really not sure who wrote it. We're not really sure about the time frame, but it seems like it could be around 1000 BC. So let's keep going down a little bit more. Now, I want you to see a couple of things before we get back to Ruth. So you see up here on my screen, sorry, we have books. Now, remember in the Old Testament, a lot of the books are going to fall into different categories. So we talked earlier about books that dealt with the law and doing what is good, what's right, what's moral. And those books could be like Genesis, Exodus, definitely Leviticus. Remember we talked about that? And that was like a whole book of you should do this and you should not do that. Numbers and Deuteronomy. We come over here to Ruth, her book falls in the category of history. So I'm kind of partial to this one because I think it's really cool that we have, once again, a woman or a book that focused on a woman, even if she didn't write it. And First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings and Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. And another book, here's another book that's focused on the woman, is Esther. This is a cool book to read, and it's pretty short too. But anyway, so I want to focus right here in this second column. Look at, these are historical books. The third column, these are wisdom literature books, and we'll talk about some of these next week, mainly Psalms and Proverbs. We'll take a look at a few of these next week. But all of these are like sayings and poetry, not a lot of history. It may tell about history, but it's not like a narrative or anything. And then lastly, in the Old Testament, you will see, and I don't want to say lastly, but a large part of the Old Testament is prophecy. And we'll deal with that a little bit after Thanksgiving. And I already am going to apologize that is so many books of prophecy, 17, and we won't be able to deal we won't be able to deal with them all in depth. But you have major prophets and you have minor prophets. And when we say major, it doesn't mean that they were any bigger than the other person. It just means that those people, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the Book of Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, it just means that they wrote more. That's all. And then the minor prophets, these are just smaller books. That's all. Okay, just means that they're not as long. Those books aren't as long as the major prophets up at the top. All right, so anyway, as we come back to Ruth, all right, so jog your memory again. Ruth's book is going to focus on history. And once again, we keep going back to these people. History of who? History of Jewish people, history of the Israelites. So it gives a lot of history of how they continue to move around. And so we see that this woman, Ruth, is a very noble woman. She's a worthy woman. And you would think that, of course, that would be the characteristic of a woman who has a book named after her. So it wouldn't be a book named after somebody sinful, right? Or somebody that did something really crazy. They wouldn't put that on as a title of the book. Once again, when we say authorship, who wrote it? We don't really know. We think it could be Ruth. Maybe Ruth told her story to somebody else and they wrote it for her. But the Jewish tradition assigns it to a personhood of Samuel. But we are totally not sure. But it says also the author may have lived after the death of Samuel. So if they lived after the death of Samuel, it couldn't be Samuel. Okay, so basically when we have authorship, we have some similarities of people that it could be, but with this particular book and many other biblical books, we're not quite sure exactly who. All right, the date, remember we said we think it's around 1000 BC, but this particular story we do know took place during the time of Judges. And let me just go back a little bit because we didn't get a chance to really dive into the book of Judges. And the book of Judges is right before the book of Ruth, right? And so, okay, so in our country, we just finished an election. Lord help us. And we have presidents, right? And we have presidents every 4 years, or we elect a president every 4 years. And then we have mayors and all that stuff in our local towns. But in this particular point in the Old Testament, the people who ruled them were judges. And some of those judges were really good. Remember, oh, y'all, remember last week we talked about, you know what? No, I don't think we talked about all of this. It was in your PowerPoint. And Tim, are you on? I think Tim is on.
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, Tim answered our trivia question. Who was one of the judges that you looked up?
Deborah.
Deborah, very good. A lady judge. Yeah. And can you tell the group anything that you remember from Deborah?
She was both a judge and a military leader, and she worked with the other military leader, whose name I can't recall, to lead a battle against the Canaanites. And he didn't want to go into battle without her, so she said that because that your battle's going to be won by a woman, and it was won by a woman who invited the enemy general into his tent, and she put a tent peg through his head.
Oh, yeah.
And they came back victorious, and they sung songs of her victory.
Well, very good. Very good. And that comes from Judges chapter 4. The man that she was working with that was scared, Tim, his name sounds like our former president, Barack.
Right.
B-A Barak. And, I'm not saying that that's his name. His name might come from something else. Okay, so anyway, let's keep moving. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. Make me feel
You're
like
welcome.
y'all turn. Okay, so we're going to go back. Let's go back to Ruth. Now, every Old Testament book, or really every book of the Bible, has an audience. So I want you to think about it like this. If you wrote a letter, we don't write letters like we used to, but if you wrote a letter to a friend, you are writing this letter or this text or this email to them. And you're talking about things that they understand. Or if you wrote a letter to your family members, if you're away, you're sending a letter or a postcard or email or something, that postcard is for that particular group of people. So when we talk about this word audience, we're asking ourselves, who did this person write this book for? Because it's not written for us in 2020, right? When these people sat down to write something, and we see all these wonderful books that made it into what we call the canon, which is the Bible as we know it today. They wrote this book with people in mind, and it wasn't necessarily us. So anyway, let me go back. So the audience, or the people that were in mind, was Israel in the land of Canaan. And Canaan was this promised land that we saw the group of this Jewish people moving to. Okay, under a united monarchy, and they were under King David. They're reminded of how individual faithfulness can exist in the midst of national faithlessness. Okay, so remember, as we went back to the book of Judges, they wanted these judges, right, to be over them and to rule them, because they thought if they had the judges, they could, live better. So it would be like us in 2020 saying, no, God, we don't want a president. We want some individual judges that are going to rule each state, and we're not going to pay attention to a national president. It would be like us saying that nowadays. And back in the day, even the judges didn't work out very well for them. And I don't think it will work out well for us nowadays. That's the reason why we got, president's another story. All right. The story of Ruth covers a long period of time. So here's another thing that I want you to understand. When you read, even as you're reading historically, even if you don't follow the Christian faith, but even if you read biblical stories, I want you to always understand that there is time that lapses between those stories. So it could be we're reading one chapter and then we get to another chapter of a particular book, and maybe a couple of years have passed. We don't really know that, right? Reading it. Sometimes the book writer might say, and the next year, or in this particular year, something happened. But many times we don't know how much time has passed. So anyway, the story of Ruth actually spans about 11 years from chapter 1 to chapter 4. And like I said, it's a pretty cool book to read if you get a chance. Try to read the whole thing. It's only 4 chapters if you would like to. One thing that I do too is sometimes I can't really sit down like I want to, being busy. And if you guys go to BibleGateway.com, I think it's BibleGateway.com or .net, and they have an audio version. And sometimes I just put the audio on and it just reads it to me. So I can listen to it. Okay, so anyway, let's characterize the main characters. And so I want everybody, if you have a Bible or your paper Bible with you, or if you're online, I want everybody to go to the book of Ruth and go to chapter 1. The book of Ruth and go to chapter 1. If you have an actual Bible, it's going to come after the book of Judges. Or if you're online, you can just type in Ruth chapter 1. If you need to access it online, BibleGateway.net is really good. All right. Okay, so everybody go to chapter 1. Now I'm reading from the King James, and I shouldn't be reading from that one, but let's pinpoint some locations here. So location, and remember we talked way back in chapter 1, geography and finding places is really important. It says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. Okay, wait, did everybody catch that? Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. Let me see if I can get mine on the screen. Hold on one second. I'm gonna see if I can pull mine up on the screen so we can read together. That's it. Still there with me?
Yes, we're still here.
Okay. I'm gonna pull it up on the screen so we can read together. Okay, here I go. I'm coming back. Okay, all right, so let's see here. I got all kind of pop-up stuff. All right, so location is really important for when you read. And this tells us something right here. In the days when the judges ruled. Let's just stop right there. So that tells us time frame. As scholars, so we're trying to figure out, ooh, when was this book written? Look at the author. So the author is yelling, hey, this is the time of the judges. Okay. First sentence. So we know what time frame it was, but what's the big thing that's going on, y'all? Can you see mine? What's the big thing that's going on?
The famine.
There's a famine. Okay, so imagine this. We're just on the first sentence, and we've gotten so much out of this first sentence. So imagine this, y'all. If somebody wrote about 2020, and Lord help us, if they said, in the days of Trump, there was a pandemic in the land, right? Oh my goodness. So that sets it up time frame. You say, okay, when was it? When Trump was president. What happened? There was a big pandemic. There was a COVID-19 or whatever. Okay, so you see, as the book opens, we have time already defined for us, so we kind of know what time frame this is, and we know the situation. So there's a famine in the land. That tells us something's not good. So if there's a famine, and even for us, if somebody said there was a pandemic, oh my goodness, that doesn't sound good, does it? So a man in Bethlehem, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Okay, let's just stop. This is still the first verse. We haven't gotten to the second verse. So I want you to see a few things. This is a story. And what's happening with this family so far? Even if we don't read this whole book, what have we figured out about this family so far?
They had a famine in the land.
There was a famine. And so we know if there's no food, look, I just want you to liken it to us in this time. If all the Krogers, if all the Publix, if all the farms, if all the farmers market, if everything closed up, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? We're gonna be hungry. But let's say if they all closed up, if all the Publix and all the Krogers and all the Ingles, what's the other grocery stores? You know, all the Walmarts, all the Targets, if all of them closed up because they didn't have any food in Georgia, and they say, but wait a minute, we have food in South Carolina, where are we gonna go? I'm going to South Carolina because I need some food. So they got in their imaginary car, you know, they didn't have a car, and they moved to another place. So remember, we talked a while back how people move from place to place. One of the key things is they move because of water, they need water, or they need food, or commerce, or some type of business. All right, so anyway, I want you to catch the locations. They move from where to where?
From Bethlehem to Judah.
Oh, okay, Bethlehem's in Judah. So they moved from Bethlehem.
Bethlehem and went to Moab.
There you go. And went to Moab. So Moab has food. Moab has fertile ground. They can work there and stuff like that. All right. So anyway, let's keep going with this family. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was, here we go. We're being introduced to some of these folks. His wife's name was Naomi. And if you're like me, I would almost have to write like a family tree. So you have Elimelech, and he's married to Naomi. And then they have two boys, Mahlon and Chilion. They have two, well, should I say two sons? Okay. All right. And so anyway, they go to Moab and they live there. Okay. Now look, y'all. The story is taking a change. I want you to go to verse 3 with me. Now Elimelech, remember that was Naomi's husband. What happened to him?
He died.
He died, Lord, and left her with
two sons.
Now, if this was the opening to our movie, you know, and we have, you know, Naomi's doing good, and they, you know, they're moving to their new house, and they finally got some food, and she's frying up all the chicken, and she's making her cabbage and her string beans and all this good stuff. And now, Lord, her husband has died, and she has these two boys to raise. Well, I should say two boys because they're older.
That's right.
Okay, so he has left her with these two sons. And the two sons, let's go to verse 4, because we're getting the family tree down. They married Moabite women. So they married women over there in Moab. One of the women was named Orpah, and the other lady was named Ruth. And let me just pause right here. All right, so you got the two sons, and their names are Mahlon and Chilion. They married two women. I mean, each of them got married. Orpah and Ruth. Orpah, I want you to look at that name right there. That's Orpah. And it's interesting, if you ever listen to Oprah Winfrey's story, her mother wanted to name her Orpah, but the midwife mixed the letters up, and it went on her birth certificate as Oprah. And so she's Oprah, but it was interesting how she tells her story of her name. Her mom wanted her to be named Orpah. Okay, so anyway, after they had lived there about 10 years. Okay, so look at this, y'all. So we've moved from verse 1. I want you to see this. So from verse 1 to verse 4, we've moved some years down the road, at least over 10 years. All right, after they had lived there about 10 years, both Marlon and Killian also died. We don't know how they died. Maybe they just got hurt or something. We don't know exactly what happened. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So let's put this in park a little bit and understand the culture. So during this time frame, women didn't work and women didn't provide for their households. Who provided?
The man.
The man. So it's interesting how the author is telling you, y'all, this is a bad situation. Do you see it? It's just jumping off the page. The author is like, Lord, they got married. The author's like, they got married. One was named Orpah, one was named Ruth. And then, Lord, 10 years later, they died. And Naomi was left without her sons and her husband. So she's left without 3 adult men that could care for her. And remember, she's away from her family, that if she had a brother or a father or a male cousin or something. And so in that culture, the man was going to take care of the home. Now she's left without a husband and son. Somebody go on mute. Okay, so let me just go right here and then we're going to go back to our lesson. So I want you guys to see a couple of things that really set the stage for the book of Ruth. Okay, so go down here to verse 6. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. So remember, now it's just her and the girls. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Let me get 8 and 9, and then we're going to stop. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. Okay, let's just stop right there. What do we learn so far about Naomi? What's the action that we see so far?
That she was a God-fearing woman.
She was God-fearing. Yes. So we see, very good. So we see in verse 7 and 8, she's preparing to do what? Is she just going to sit there? So remember, she's in Moab. She doesn't have a husband and she doesn't have her boys. And she just has the girls with her, the daughters-in-law, should I say. And so her action is, well, I'm not just going to sit here. I'm going to just have to go on back home. Right? And because she says with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take her back to the land of Judah. Okay, and so it's something about always knowing that you could go back home. So she's like, look, I gotta go back home. Maybe she has a dad there. Maybe she has some male cousins. Maybe she has a brother that can help take care of her. All right, so let's set this up and then we'll go back. Then Naomi said to her daughter, okay, wait, I read that already. Verse 11. Okay, y'all. Y'all remember the two girls, the two daughters-in-law? Y'all remember their names? Go back up here. What were the two daughters-in-law's names? Orpah and Ruth.
Ruth.
There you go. Orpah and Ruth. Those were the two daughters-in-laws. Mother-in-law is Naomi. All right. And so in this story, remember, this is a narrative. This is a story. And so Naomi's like, look, I got to go back home. I don't have anybody to take care of me. I can't work up here. But Naomi says, return home. She told the girls, go on back home, and you go back with your parents. Orpah, excuse me. And at this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where will I go and where will I stay? Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And she says, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Okay, so let's stop. Now we get to see the two characters of the two daughters-in-law. Remember, the two daughters-in-law are Ruth and Orpah. What did Orpah do?
Orpah went back.
Orpah, I'm going back.
Yeah.
And I'm going back to my, maybe she had a daddy, maybe she had some brothers. She said, look, I love you, mama, but I'm going back to my people. But Ruth, okay, so we have Ruth on the other hand, who the book is named after. Ruth said what?
She was going with Naomi and she went.
She went, right. She was, I don't want to say forceful, but determined. She was determined. She's like, look, you could tell me to go on back home. I'm not going back home. So what we gonna do now? She said, where you die, I'm gonna die. Where you gonna be buried, I'm gonna be buried. I'm staying with you, mama. And that let me just stop right there. What does that say? What does that say to you so far as we get to this opening chapter of Ruth? What does that say to you so far about the characters of Orpah and Ruth?
They each took different paths. One took a path of not knowing, and the other went back to what she knew before. Ruth was very loyal. Ruth was very loyal to Naomi, but she did not know what was going to greet her, whereas Naomi was concerned about the well-being of Ruth. And the other daughter-in-law, she went back to her people where she went back to the known. And Ruth went with Naomi where she went to, it would have been an unknown for Ruth. Although Naomi knew what it could possibly be like, but Ruth was going into an unknown.
She sure was. She was going into, I'm going back to our lesson. Hold on, y'all. Y'all let me know if you can see the PowerPoint come back up here. I think I'm doing something wrong. Okay, very good. And so neither one of the women, remember that when can y'all see it?
Yes.
Okay. When you read the books, read it for the stories that it is. And neither one of the women, Orpah or Ruth, made a bad decision. Ruth said, I'm gonna hang with you. Orpah said, I think it's best for me if I go back to my house. And somebody mute yourself, please. And I think it just also comes to us, even as we're in modern times. Everybody doesn't always have to make the same decision, right? God is with us whether we make this decision or that decision, but I think they made the best decision in whatever their situations were. All right, so anyway, let's keep moving. The first chapter of the book of Ruth really sets it up for us. And so we can see just a couple of things. Right here is Bethlehem. You see my map. And then right here is Moab. So I'm not exactly sure about how long it would take them to travel from Bethlehem to Moab, but you can bet that this wasn't just a couple of day journey. Wasn't a couple of hours, you know, and they're on foot, y'all. So they're walking. So it took them quite some time. So I want you to also understand, for women, for Naomi to return back to Bethlehem on foot with another woman with her, that wasn't an easy task. They weren't, you know, they didn't catch an Uber, they didn't catch a Greyhound. You know, these are some brave ladies, weren't they? All right, so there are a couple of key words that I want to highlight for you, and we're going to get back to our lesson, to the video. You hear this particular word called kinsman, the kinsman redeemer we saw in the video. And that's somebody who redeems. And later on, and when we say redeems, like saves the people or saves the family from something bad happening. Later on in prophecy, like in Isaiah, and also later on in the New Testament, Jesus, the personhood of Jesus serves as the Redeemer, serves as the one who will save the people, save humans, you know. You also see this theme in the book of Ruth of just unconditional love. Ruth was just unconditional with her love for her mother-in-law. And if any of you all have mother-in-laws or father-in-laws, or you may have them in the future, you know, that is just such a beautiful love to have a devoted love to your spouse's parents. Okay. All right, let me keep moving so we don't run out of time. Okay. All right, and I just want to highlight a few things for you before we run out of time here. All right, with the book of Ruth, and if you have your book open with you, so remember, we read the first, kind of like the first half of chapter 1, and we get to see this undying love that's demonstrated from Ruth to her mother-in-law, Naomi. And then Ruth says, no, I'm gonna stay with you, and we're gonna hang in there. And she continues to care for Naomi even as you get into chapter 2. I'm gonna go back to the video, and you're gonna see another man come into the story, and his name is Boaz. Boaz. So let me cue up our videos. Anybody heard of that name before, Boaz? So we see another gentleman. Hey there, Opal. We have another gentleman that's going to come into the story. All right, y'all, hold on. Oh, let me share the sound. And Boaz really kind of saves the day for him. Here we go.
In chapter 4, it all comes together. It turns out, at the last minute, Boaz discovers there is a family member who's closer to Naomi than he is, and he's actually eligible before him to redeem the family. But at the last second, this family member finds out that he's going to have to marry Ruth, the Moabite, and so he declines. But Boaz, remember, he knows Ruth's true character. And so he acquires the family property of Naomi and he marries Ruth. And so just at the beginning, how Ruth was loyal to Naomi's family, so now Boaz is loyal to Naomi's family as well. The story concludes with a reversal of all of the tragedies from chapter 1. So the death of the husband and the sons is reversed as Ruth is married again and gives birth to a new son, granting joy to Naomi. And this symmetry between the opening and the closing, it's even more remarkable. So remember, the opening tragedy was followed by a great act of loyalty on the part of Ruth. And that is now matched by Boaz's act of loyalty that leads to the family's final restoration. And this symmetry, it highlights the design of the internal chapters as well. So each of the chapters begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan for their future. And that's followed by a providential meeting between Ruth and Boaz. And each chapter concludes with Naomi and Ruth rejoicing at what's taken place. This story is beautifully designed, and that design actually connects with a really interesting feature of the story, and that's how little God is mentioned. Right? The characters talk about God a few times, but the narrator actually never once mentions God doing anything directly in the story, and that's its brilliance. Because God's providence is at work behind every scene of this story, weaving together the circumstances and choices of all these characters. So Naomi, her tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, but actually the whole story is about God's mission to restore her and her family. And he's doing so through Ruth, through her boldness and loyalty, which is healing to Naomi's life, but not without Boaz, who's a no-nonsense farmer who's full of generosity and loyalty. And so God uses his integrity combined with Ruth's boldness to save Naomi and her family. And so this story brilliantly explores the interplay of God's purposes and will with human decision and will. God weaves together the faithful obedience of his people to bring about his redemptive purposes in the world. And that leads to the real end of the story. The book of Ruth concludes with a genealogy, showing how Boaz and Ruth's son, Obed, was the grandfather of King David, from whom came the lineage of the Messiah. And so all of a sudden, these seemingly mundane, ordinary events in this story are woven into God's grand story of redemption for the whole world. And so the book of Ruth invites us to consider how God might be at work in the very ordinary, mundane details of our lives as well. And that's what the book of Ruth is all about.
All right, let me come back to you. Okay, so uh-oh. All right, so anyway, as we come to the end, hopefully you have a better understanding of the book of Ruth. And if you get a chance, if you have your actual Bible open, or if you have it up on your computer, chapter 4, Ruth chapter 4, if you go down to verse 18, what the gentleman was saying in the video. So all of this stuff is happening. So you got this crazy story going on, and you're like, what does the story have to do with anything? But it had something to do with everything Old Testament, everything New Testament. So it's interesting how the writer of the story, who, remember, we're not quite sure exactly who it is. We think it could be Ruth, could be somebody else took her story and ran with it. But it says that Ruth had this baby, right, with Boaz. So remember, Boaz was like the hero. And she has this baby. The baby's name Obed, O-B-E-D. And they continue to show the generations that come from this union, right, that later on bring David, King David, and King David was in the lineage of Jesus. And so anyway, so we're going to end right there. And I think it's just really interesting. I hope that you guys can open your microphones if you have any questions. I hope that you have a better understanding of this historical book focusing on women. And did you also see in the video that it was interesting how the author does not really mention a whole lot of God did this and God said that but yet God was still present with the people. Okay. How you guys feeling? You guys
Feeling pretty good.
are-
And it was
Good.
interesting learning about how they made that decision to focus. Like it really reflects how real life would seem like, where it's like you may not see everything that God is doing, but when you look at the whole picture, you see where His hand was present.
Exactly. Exactly. They, they didn't have food. They moved over here to get food. Lord, her family members died. The male family members died, should I say. She's all alone. What are we gonna do? I'm gonna go over here. My other daughter-in-law left me. I'm left with one daughter-in-law, and we're trying to make this thing work. And it did work out. And you know what? Just in my own curiosity, I always wonder what happened to Orpah.
Mm-hmm.
She probably went on back home and got another husband or something.
Right.
Good. Any other questions, comments, students?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I I had put my whatchamacallit, Deborah response in two places. One in the email and one in the discussion place that we were all doing. So I think some other people may have put it in the discussion area. So I was just wondering if you
Okay.
saw those.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. I did check the email first.
Gotcha.
Oh, I'll be coming on down the road. Thank you. And thank you to the others as well. You guys are really staying up on it. I hope that it's enlightening for you all.
I just want to say that this story reminds me that I have to be loyal to the Lord, and my name is Opal Ruth.
Oh, look at that.
Look at God. My mother named me after her. She was Opal Jewel, and she named me Opal Ruth. She's gone on to glory and left me here to do her work, and I do it graciously.
Opal Ruth. Isn't
Yeah.
that beautiful?
Isn't that something?
So,
Yes, it
as we
is.
talk
I love
about names and meanings of names, yeah, Tim, and meanings of names. So, you have a lot of meaning behind that as you read this book of Ruth, right? As you read this book of Ruth, excuse me, you see the character of Ruth. Ruth stuck by Naomi. She didn't leave her because she could have easily rolled out. But I think the decision that God had her make, she followed that decision.
Yes.
Good. Thanks, Opal.
Well, I say I'm following in my mother's footsteps. She was a godly woman, and even coming up, there were things that I didn't understand, and I would look at her and say, "Oh no, I don't want to be like her," because she took so much. And then as I began to grow in the spirit, I realized that she was an humble woman. In her younger days, she was a Sunday school teacher at a Presbyterian church, so she did about holiness and a whole lot of other things, and so she's taught me a lot, and yet she's gone. She passed at 64 young age, but I still remember following her and trying to follow in her footsteps because she truly was a humble woman, and that's what I'm trying to be, a humble woman before the Lord.
Yes, you are. You are. Yes, you
I'm
are.
trying. I am trying to be more like Jesus every day. I can
I
do
know
it,
that's right.
but I can do all things through Christ who strengthened me. So again, I love my mother. Not one day go by that I don't miss her.
Yes.
My father was bedridden from a stroke. I took care of him in my home for 18 and a half years. And I miss him too. But it's still something about, I don't know, my mother, uh, the things that she did and how she did them. It keeps me on track to follow the Lord.
Awesome. What an impact. What an impact she made.
Yes.
Awesome.
Amen.
Tim, I thought you saying something.
No, I was just saying amen.
Oh.
Amazing story.
Sure was. Thank you, Tim. All right, Ramona and Kavetta and Brian, you guys okay?
Yes.
All right. Just checking in with you before we leave out. All right, so everyone, if you don't have any questions, just make sure, I know I'm just getting on your nerves, but make sure you do that survey. And if you haven't already, but you guys are all good right here on the screen. But those people who are watching the video, please make sure that you do your survey for the class and register for next semester so that we can get our numbers uh, straight so we know who's coming or who's not coming. It's okay. All right, everybody. We'll continue to do a great job. And I really have to say, I'm really encouraged. I love your work.